Welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Konnichiwa. So today a bit of a different stream. I'm going to be looking at what are some techniques and materials and what are bits of information that you need to know to do well on your Year 12 exams. So I'm a Japanese tutor. I do private lessons and the majority of my students are actually Year 11 and Year 12 students who are looking to do well in their Australian exams. Now, just because this is meant for an Australian audience, trust me, Japanese doesn't change much no matter where you go in the world, so it doesn't really matter. Of course, you want to look at your specific exam formats and what the learning outcomes and your syllabus says, but really, once you're in your final year of high school, Japanese is pretty similar throughout the world. So this can help you, even if you're not taking the specific Australian exams. Okay, so I've got a Google Doc here. Just post the link in the chat as well. It's in the description as well if you want it. And I'm going to be using this pretty heavily for the lesson today. Okay. Now I also have an add-on Gumtree. I do these lessons streamed through YouTube, but I also do private in-house lessons, one-on-one group lessons, whatever works for you. So if you live in Western Australia, check out the ad and I'll be happy to talk to you about organising some lessons. Otherwise, if you're not in WA and you still want private lessons with me, I do these private lessons through Google Hangouts, Skype, whatever works for you, for $50 an hour, or I do $80 for 2 hours back to back. And as it says here, I tutor any aspect of Japanese, so whether you're an absolute beginner, whether perhaps you've got a Japanese spouse that you want to speak to, maybe your in-laws a bit easier, maybe you've got some young children who you want to teach Japanese to, perhaps maybe you just want to learn another language, you go to Japan every year, you want to be able to speak a bit more. Of course, high school tutoring, university tutoring, I do a lot of this, and JLPT, so the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. I will be talking about this in a bit more depth a bit later on. But if you have any inquiries about Japanese, please send me an email, and I'd be happy to discuss them with you. I've got lots of reviews on my Gumtree page. I'm going to get more. Just got to prompt them a bit more, I guess. But yeah, check out the reviews. Got police clearance as well. So I think everyone I've ever tutored has loved the lessons. But maybe I'm a bit partial. But anyway, we're going to be talking about how to do better on Japanese exams, and particularly in Australia. How can we do this? Now the first thing I've got here is we have a link to the VCAA, which is the Victorian, I probably should have looked this up, but it's basically the state curriculum council, I guess, that set the exams and all that. Now the reason I put this link here is because Victoria publish all their exams, and not only that, but they publish the exam paper, the audio files for the listening, and really importantly, they give you answers in the form of an examination report. And this examination report is very good because it not only just tells you the answers, but it kind of says, well, these are some areas that people were very weak on this year. These are some areas that people generally did pretty well this year. And I think it's definitely worth, even if you only read one exam report, just read any random years. I mean, I would say go from about 2005 and up. Because the Japanese exam format did change a fair bit. But it's worth having a read of this exam and seeing, well, what are the kind of mistakes that people tend to make? Because if you're not making those mistakes, you're better than average. You're better than the average person. And that's going to improve your mark quite significantly. But I will be going through a few of these things. The other great thing is these exams are a fantastic resource, but don't fall into the habit of using these exams to study, okay? These exams should be really only attempted once you feel like you've done enough study, so kind of more to just before the exams. And you want to use them to practice time management, okay? This is often a very undervalued skill, I think, in exams. But if if you're strong in some areas and weak in others, you want to work out your time appropriately for this. For example, the writing section at the end. I remember that was kind of my least favorite section, and so I always wanted to leave myself a bit of extra time to write. But also listening. Okay, this is another thing. You have to be used to listening to something, getting the salient points, and then be ready to listen to it again to pick up anything that you missed. So getting good at exam conditions, I think, is really, it's not emphasized enough in school. Let's just say this. I didn't care about it at all, and I think I suffered for it. It's only when I got into university that I realized, actually, I mean, it's unfortunate, but this is how you get better at exams. You have to practice the exam. I always felt that, well, if I just study whatever the subject is, it doesn't have to be Japanese, but I thought if I just study Japanese heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps, that knowledge will come out in the exam. But that's not true. Some people are better at answering exams than other people. People are better at reading questions and finding out what is the actual question that I'm being asked, and what's the best way I can use all this knowledge in my head to answer that question. And that whole process, it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. I know it doesn't come naturally to me. I've had to work on it a lot. And I always felt it was a bit strange. Why do I have to learn this exam technique? Surely I should just study more. Unfortunately, no. You're being marked on an exam in comparison to how everyone else does as well. So you can't just try your best. You have to follow the exam format. So I would really recommend you people, if you're worried about your final exam, at least have a look at this reports. Have a look at a few if you can. And I will be going through some common areas that the examiners bring up. One part that is brought up a lot is pronunciation of katakana words. Okay, this is always a big gripe I see pretty much year in and year out on the exam. So my advice would be, first of all, I've got a video where I talk about katakana, so I would have a look at that one. But with the pronunciation, you basically just have to tell your English brain to stop pronouncing the words. It's kind of hard, but this is why when I talk later about Japanese conversation classes, you really want to be making friends with Japanese people, because you will see very quickly, if you don't pronounce your katakana words, even if they speak English, if you don't pronounce your katakana words properly, trust me, they're not going to understand what this word is. Even though you might say, hey, well, I'm Australian, I speak English as a first language, I'm pronouncing these words as they sound in English, but that's the problem. Okay, katakana words are not really English anymore. They came from English originally, most of them, but when they get pronounced, they're not really sounding like the English counterparts. You have to put the Japanese pronunciation on them, otherwise it's you're not going to get these words across. So I know some common ones are Australia. Okay, this one gets pronounced wrongly a lot. I know, especially from these Victorian reports, a lot of people pronounce Melbourne incorrectly, and so you've always got to say, well, how is it written in katakana, and I have to pronounce it that way. So L's, you've got to be careful of, and this kind of thing. But I would really recommend you spend a fair bit of time looking over those exam reports. Okay, next one. Learn your conjugations. Okay, so again, when I was learning Japanese, especially in high school, I just used to think it was a waste of time looking at all these tables and all these methods for learning the TEF form and other rules similar to that. Now, as a teacher now, I really love these tools because they set it out so well, and it's like, well, you just got to memorize this. Just memorize this table of the TEF form, and then every time you get a verb, you can make this, you can follow this rule, okay? And that's really what you want, because otherwise you're going to be kind of trapped in that you just kind of talk about the same things all the time because you're not willing to break out of your comfort zone and deal with other verbs which you're not sure what the TEF form is. But if you just learn the table, for example, you will be better at it. But let's look at a type of conjugation that I would say is probably the most common. I mean, I don't want to impute any intention here, but for sure, I reckon it's a common trap that examiners use to trip up students. So what you're going to notice is this happens a little bit in year 11, but particularly in year 12. Japanese is going to move away from, I guess, what you people may know as the plain positive form of the verb, and especially the must form. So for example, you might be very familiar with tabemasu. You're probably less familiar with taberu. And then this is even more so the case for verbs that you don't come across very often. Like asobimasu, which is to play. Asobu is the plain form. Now, even those two forms, maybe, especially by the time a lot of you get to year 12, you'll be feeling pretty familiar with the plain form and the must form. But then we can throw the negatives in there. Asobanai, tabenai. Okay, putting out these negatives, and then, the past form. Tabenakatta, asobanakatta. So it's all about learning these conjugations really well, so that when you hear them, you can identify quickly what they are. And particularly what they're going to try and do is give you verbs which perhaps you know in one form, but not so familiar in the other form. So this verb shiru, which is to know, often a lot of people either know it as shirimasen or shiranai. They know it as the negative, or they're more familiar with the te form, shiteru or shiteimasu. Okay? But then if you asked, I often ask my students, hey, so what's the original verb from shiteru? And sometimes they'll take a bit of time to work that one out, if they even get there. So if you knew your te form table, that would be a pretty simple exercise. Okay, but let's look at some common conjugations I see which get used to trap people. So we really want to learn our E adjective rule in a lot of depth. Okay, E adjectives, this is the majority of adjectives in Japanese, and it's also going to have a bit of spillover into our Thai form, as we'll see in a second. Alright, but this process here you should be able to do without even thinking. Okay, you have to. If you want to do well in a speaking part, and if you want to do well in listening, you have to know these without zero thought now. So we get our original E adjective, oishi. How do we make the negative out of any E adjective? Well, we drop the we drop the E, and we add kunai. Oishi, oishikunai. You should just be able to do that super quick. Just think about if you're talking to people in real time, okay? You can't be pausing even for a second to think about what this rule is. You just have to say it very quickly. And you're going to get better at it by practicing it. Okay? And then once we've got our negative, well, we just replace this final E with katta. Oishiku nakatta. Alright, so we can do this with every E adjective except for this guy. Alright, except for this one. So now we got E, which means good. Yokunai. Alright, this is kind of the exception. Okay, I guess I should put a star there. But it's an exception, alright? I've done another video on this, my adjectives video, where you can look at it. But this is just a special case, just for this word. Okay? And we also see it in this word, kakkoi. Alright, so the negative of this. Kakkoyokunai. But anyway. But then we just apply our same rule again. Replace this last E with katta. Yokunakatta. Okay? Now, like I said, there is a bit of spillover here when we deal with our Thai form. Okay? So our want to do form. Tabetai, for example. Alright, so even though that this is taberu is a verb, when we make this particular conjugation, this change, we actually treat it like an E adjective. Okay? It's not really important why we do that, but you can look into it if you want. Take Him has a good explanation on his guide to Japanese.org website. So we just treat it like an E adjective, so this E gets replaced with kunai. So tabeta kunai. I don't want to eat. Okay? And then again, the e adjective rule, we replace this last e with katta, tabetaku nakatta. Tabetaku nakatta. Right. So really, if you're struggling with these kind of conjugations, I don't want to be cruel, but you're probably not going to have a very good time in year 12. Okay, you're going to have to study hard from now. Like, I would say you need to be doing 3 to 4 hours of study a day. If this is confusing to you, you've got a long road ahead. Let's put it that way. All right, but you got to get very good at these. Now, what the kind of trap is that examiners will try and get you to fall into is that they're going to try and confuse you, this nakata and nai and this ku. They're going to try and confuse you with this type of grammar, okay? This type of grammar. Now this link down here goes to Take Kim's website, the guy I just mentioned, and these sentences are from this website. But I would really encourage you to read this whole page where he's talking about various uses of naru and suru, because I would say that this is, if I was going to give you a list of stuff which is definitely popping up on Year 12 exams, this is going to be one of them. Okay, so I mean, we've got the very basic form of naru, okay, and we use it with our ni particle. So watashi wa isha ni natta. So I became a doctor. Alright, and this gets used very commonly in Japanese when you're talking about dreams and aspirations for jobs and things like that. Okay, but we can also use our adjectives just up here, and then they are adverbs, okay, when we use them in this next example. And an adverb does what it says on the tin, it adds to the verb. Okay, so it kind of describes the verb in a bit more detail. So what have we got here? Benkyou o takusan shita kara atama ga yoku natta. Alright, so there's quite a few bits of grammar in here. But first, benkyou o takusan shita kara. So remember we've got our past form here. This is another thing I want to point out. Always take note of the tense, alright? Tense in Japanese is not that tricky. I think there are some languages, not that I would know, but I'm pretty sure there are, I think Portuguese, for example, has some craziness with lots of different verb tenses. Japanese, you really don't have to deal with much tense, but it's there for a reason, okay? And you will lose half marks and things like this if you don't pick up the tense properly. But this kara, right, is our compound sentence. I did a video on this, I believe last week, maybe the week before. No, it wasn't last week, but I definitely did a whole video on compound sentences about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So because, well, I did a lot of study, so atama ga yoku natta. Alright, now this is a little bit of a phrase that you have to get used to saying in Japanese, okay? Because we would say I became smarter or I became cleverer, something like this. But in Japanese, you say my head. If you want to say someone is smart, you say their head is good or their head is bad. Atama ga ii, atama ga warui. Alright, notice our ga particle here as well. But we see yoku natta. Okay, so yoku natta. This is not the same as yoku nai or yoku nakatta. I know they look super similar, and pretty much it's only missing the ka, I guess. But there is a big difference between these two words. So you've got to get used to saying, well, this plain form, you're getting used to seeing what is this plain form and telling yourself, well, yoku natta, this is actually two separate words. This is not yoku nai or yoku nakatta, but yoku natta. Okay, so it became good. So you want to really, really focus on this conjugation and get used to seeing natta meaning narimashita. Okay, and this kind of comes from the te form, which I'll look at in a second, a bit later. Okay, so you're getting used to this. Now, the other variation of this type of sentence, or this type of grammar I should say, that we're going to see a lot is using this yo ni. Yoni. Okay? Now again, just like the first sentence, we use yoni a lot in Japanese. Okay? Now whenever we try and translate this sentence, it always, I don't know, not always, but it does come out as awkward a lot of the time. But yoni, really, it's kind of wordy to say this in English, but it kind of translates roughly to doing things in a way that X. Alright, so here we've got 毎日肉を食べるようになった. Okay, so if we just look at this first bit, we've got a pretty standard sentence. 毎日肉を食べる. So eat meat every day. But when we have this yo ni, and we see it's direct, attached directly to this verb, and then when we put it with natta, it's like became in the way that eating meat every day. Okay? So this comes up a lot. Now I remember there was one example in one of these VCE exams I showed earlier, where it was in the listening, and the phrase was, I believe it was something like 他の学生他の学生 can't quite remember exactly the phrasing, but 迷惑しないようにください. Okay, so this is another great example of they're going to use forms of the verb, particularly the negative and the past form, or both, which are going to sound unfamiliar to you. Okay, so meiwaku is a really important word to learn. I'll touch on it later in this next point. But meiwaku, okay, this means nuisance or burden or trouble, okay? And if we're thinking about Japanese society, they really want to avoid putting burdens and trouble on other people, okay? So we have shinai, okay? Our plain form of shimasen, I guess some of you might be more familiar with. But shinai yoni, so basically, you know, do things in a way so that you don't bother other people, okay? And this was an example of, it was like instructions for an exam, I think, okay? And it was kind of saying, well, if you finish the exam early, you can leave, but don't bother other students as you leave. So pack up quietly, don't scrape your chair, all these kind of things, right? Meiwaku shinai yoni. Okay, so this is another example of, you want to be very, very familiar with this yoni form, because it's just going to come up. I'm telling you, it's going to come up. But as I said, please have a look at this link and look at how Takim describes all the various, because I really just touched on this naru part. There's a whole bit of suru as well, which is also super important. And the difference between the two is again very important. Okay, next point. Now this is one thing which I definitely feel was one of my weakest points, and luckily I went on exchange to Japan, so I kind of went to some of these festivals and I knew about them, but I have to say I did, don't get me wrong, I really did like Japanese culture, but I wasn't really into it that much. I was just very interested in the language more than anything. But you know, once I got over there, the culture is pretty cool, and it's very different to Australia, which is I guess the best part. But yes, you want to learn about some Japanese festivals, okay? Now, what's the best way to do this? Well, I mean, the internet. Alright, we've got YouTube. There's Japanese people record this stuff. You know, Japanese people tend to like their festivals, so they record them. So there's plenty up there. You could just Google for something like list major Japanese cultural festivals, okay? And I think if you just read a few lines in Wikipedia about these major festivals, at least you'll have an idea, and you just want to remember the name and basically what it's about. You don't really have to remember the date. I mean, that can help if you can remember that much, but that's not going. You know, they're never going to ask you something like that. Like, what is the date of Obon? You know, it's going to be a bit crazy. So if I was going to list a few, Golden Week, okay? I think most people know about this, but you want to learn about Golden Week, alright? And what kind of detail would you want to know about Golden Week? Well, think about how this is going to be shoehorned into a Japanese exam, okay? This is always the context you want to learn it in. So what is Golden Week? Well, Golden Week is there's basically a few public holidays in Japan that fall around the same week, about over a 2-week period, and I believe it's I believe it's May. It's this thing, I don't even know, but what it means is that this gives a lot of people free time, so they go traveling. All right, so this is the time I've seen it come up in exams. Okay, they'll say stuff like, well, you know, what are the changing attitudes to traveling during Golden Week, for example? Because because everyone's traveling, the trains and planes and hotels are just crazy. It's all crowded. So then I remember there was an exam once that I looked at where they were saying, because of this, you now have this like pushback from a lot of people who are now, instead of using Golden Week to travel, which is what was kind of traditional, people are staying home and hanging out with their family, having little picnics and things like this, and just using the time to relax, because travel can be a bit hectic, okay, and the tourist spots are just nuts during this time. So that's worth looking at. Other ones you want to look at, Obon, okay, the ancestor worship one. Of course, anything to do with Oshogatsu. I should have had this in Japanese, but whatever. Oshogatsu, okay, so New Year's. And what do we want to learn? Well, osechi ryori. Um, you could maybe look at Ekiden, I believe it's called, which is this it's like a big running race where they run between stations through. I think it's in Tokyo. Really should have looked this up before making the video. Anyway, they show it on TV around New Year's. Otoshidama. Okay, so in Japan, Christmas is not that big of a deal, but New Year's is. So you get your otoshidama, which is like your envelope full of money that you get from your extended family, basically. And it's kind of, for Japanese kids, this is kind of, the most amount of money they'll get in a year. So it's kind of like your savings for the whole rest of the year. So it's a big deal to get all this money. With some other ones, I guess Fukubukuro. I know this one's come up before. Okay, this is another New Year's tradition, and I remember actually in the exam report that the examiner said this was actually a very poorly handled section. And I think, well, the main thing is just people would never heard of Fukubukuro. Okay, and it's a tricky concept to explain if you've never heard of it. Because what is it? Well, it's like a lucky dip bag full of objects, which actually it's more expensive to buy the objects separately, but you don't know what's going to be in there, and they range in price. The bag is, and then they describe the bag, and I just remember all these little things added up to it being actually a very difficult listening exercise. But if you knew what Fukubukuro was, it was probably pretty easy. But otherwise, if you're trying to work out what they're talking about, and it's some kind of fancy paper bag with stuff in it that's worth more than if you try to purchase, well, not worth more, but it costs more if you try and purchase it separately. This is kind of a difficult concept to understand, especially in an exam situation. So of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but you want to look at Gion Matsuri in Kyoto. You want to look at all these festivals. They're kind of a very quintessentially Japanese, and just kind of understand them. Now, the trap you could fall into is that you do too much research on these, and then if it just so happens to come up on the exam, you spend all this time writing about things you know about the festival. But be careful with doing that, because you can only get marked based on material that has been presented to you. So if you start talking about, the origins of Fukubukuro, for example, when the article was more talking about, consumer attitudes towards Fukubukuro, like, people are buying less of them or whatever, then you're not going to get any marks for that, right? Because it's not examinable material. So just be careful of that. That's a common criticism I see from the examiners, who basically, they normally word it something like, students gave irrelevant information in regards to the festival. Okay? So I'm just saying, learn these things to get context, but still listen to the material in the exam. So cultural events. Alright, there's quite a few in Japan. Major landmarks. This is definitely a very good area to spend some time on, okay? So when I talk about major landmarks, well, pretty much everyone knows the Tokyo Skytree and all those kind of things. But try and think a little bit laterally with this as well. So I would say it's probably worth learning the major stations in Tokyo, for example. Don't worry about Osaka. Um, I mean, as you'll see, that the Japanese program in Australia, at least, is very slanted towards Hyojungo. Okay, so standard Japanese. So obviously, we're going to be focusing on Tokyo a lot of the time. I mean, it's probably worth looking at some stuff in Osaka. But yeah, you want to learn the major stations, and one in particular that I notice likes to get used is Ueno. Okay, so this likes to get used because it can be confusing to some students, right? Because if you hear Ueno Eki or Ueno Koen, alright, if you're listening to this, you might say Ueno Koen. You're saying, is it like the park that's above something? And you're going to get really confused. We just have to remember Ueno. This is a proper noun, okay? This is the name of a place, major place in Tokyo. So if we're going to look at that, I would say Shibuya, Roppongi, Harajuku, Shinjuku, Ueno, Ikebukuro. Okay, I'm probably missing a few. Tokyo, Shin Tokyo, Shinsaibashi. You want to look at these major areas all throughout Japan. Okay, it's good to know these. So one thing you can do is just get a Tokyo map. All right, get a Tokyo map and just look at it and look at the major stations. Okay, and sometimes this can help you with a bit of kanji practice as well, because reading names, proper nouns in kanji can be quite tricky. So it's good if you can practice both. So yeah, looking at those would be good. At the same time, you also want to be pretty familiar with Japan itself, okay? For a few reasons. So let me bring up something here. Okay, so here I got a map of Japan. It's not a bad one actually. I like this because it's got all the prefectures. But first of all, we want to look at some vocabulary here. So there's an important word worth learning, and it's Torofuken. Torofuken. Let me just write that out real quickly. Torofuken. Okay, Torofuken. Alright, so this is like the word you use to describe all the kind of administrative areas. So we'll see in a sec, but we have to for like Tokyo to, and we have this is do from Hokkaido, and then we have fu, so Osaka fu, and we have ken, which is the one pretty much everyone should be familiar with, right? This is prefecture. So Todofuken, alright, Nihon no Todofuken. It's the administrative areas. So we see here we've got Hokkaido Chiho up the top, alright? So this big guy up here, Hokkaido. Alright, and we have Tohoku Chiho, okay, so we have all these. And then so some of these you should really have a go at trying to read these, and then you can check later. But we have, Aomori Ken. This is definitely a kanji I would expect a year 12 person to be able to read. Okay, most of these will be pretty hard. You should probably read this one, Akita. It's Fukushima. Some of you are interested in that one. Then we have Kanto, okay, so that's where Tokyo is. Most of these are pretty hard. Ibaraki, Gunma. Yeah, these are quite hard. We've got Saitama Ken, Chiba Ken. Okay, and here we have our to. Okay, remember I said Todofuken. So this is the to. Todofuken. We have Kanagawa, which is where Yokohama is. Right, we have Chubu. So a lot of these will be hard. We got Fujiyama. This one, 17. You should probably be able to read this one. Ishikawa-ken. Beautiful place, by the way. If you guys ever get a chance to go to Japan, you really have to go. It's this thumb-looking one, and it's got one of the 3 major gardens. The Kenrokuen is located in Ishikawa-ken. Beautiful place. Yamanashi. Yeah, we've got Nagano. Okay, so some of these you should be able to read. And Aichiken is where I used to live. Nagoya. Yeah, and now here we have our Kyoto Fu and Osaka Fu. You definitely want to be able to be reading these ones. But, you know, I said Todo Fuken. This is the Fu. Okay, so I should really point out, so the To kind of means metropolis, right? So we've got Tokyo, metropolis of Tokyo, then we've got like the cities of Kyoto and Osaka. It's not really cities, it's bigger than a city, but you get the idea. We've got Hyogo, Nara, Wagayama, yeah, Yamaguchi-ken. Okay, so we should be able to read some of these. Then we've got Shikoku. Alright. Now, I remember once in an exam, they were talking about Shikoku, and then they said, oh, you actually have to take, they said, a lot of students read it in kanji, whereas Shikoku is normally written in hiragana. I thought, no, that's not right. Yeah, this map just proves it. Alright, so we've got a lot of places, Kochi. Okay, and then we got Kyushu. Alright, Kyushu, Chiho, Okinawa, Chiho. Alright, and we've got the inset of Okinawa over here. It's actually way down south. Southwest. But anyway. Okay, so you really want to know some basic geography about Japan, okay? For example, you want to know that the weather is quite different. You know, if we looked at that Tohoku place, the yellow place on that map I showed before, super cold. Hokkaido, obviously, super cold. You know, West Japan, like Fukuoka and all that, doesn't quite get as cold, doesn't snow so much. So you just want a general idea about Japanese geography, major landmarks. Okay, and again, Wikipedia, YouTube, these are great resources for this. Okay, the last point I wanted to make is consider things that are a part of Japanese life but are not so in Australia. Okay, now I guess earthquakes, it's not the nicest thing to read about and learn about, but you have to understand that earthquakes are a massive deal in Japan. Okay, first of all, Japanese kids go through earthquake drills, so it's kind of common knowledge what you're supposed to do in an earthquake. And I see these type of questions come up on the exam quite a lot. Main reason is that with an earthquake, for example, you have to open windows and leave doors open when as an earthquake is happening, because when an earthquake happens, it causes stuff to move and shift, and then doors become jammed and windows become jammed, and you can't open them. So it might seem counterintuitive when it's an earthquake for you to be opening windows, but so you can escape later in case something really bad happens. So that's a perfect listening, okay? Because people are not, you know, if you don't know about earthquakes, like in Australia we pretty much don't have earthquakes, we're not going to know these things. And the windows thing, it seems kind of counterintuitive. So I remember this confuses a lot of, I don't think I've ever had students ever do well in that particular listening question, because I remember they combined the potential form with the that naru form we talked about before. So it was something like mado to doa ake naku natte shimaimasu, or something like this. Okay, so it's like they become unable to be opened. Okay, so yeah, or I think it's like akeru koto ga dekinaku naru, something like that. I can't quite remember the phrasing they used, but either way, it confuses students because you're just not expecting this negative. Okay, it's because you're much more used to the plain positive. Okay, so earthquakes is a good example. Just general big city life, you know, living in Tokyo, how it's kind of different. Toll roads, I guess, that's another one. So you really want to look at all those different types of things. Okay, now this one, I try and emphasize this one all the time, okay? I know that you've been given textbooks and that you're in school, so he's like, I gotta study from a textbook. Trust me, textbooks are pretty much never gonna teach you anything. Might seem a bit controversial, but you have to be doing self-study, alright? And you need to be spending time on it. I mean, think about how people learn languages, alright? Think about all these kids who are born in a country, can't speak any language, but just by growing up and listening to people and seeing stuff and hearing stuff all day, they become fluent, alright? So you've got to think, well, if I'm going to learn a second language, I have to do that process again and even more, because I'm not going to have this child brain just sponging all this information in. You're going to be a bit older and your brain is not so flexible and pliable, so you need to spend a lot of hours studying. I mean, I did exchange, but trust me, I wasn't just sitting around hoping to learn Japanese. I spent hours, hours and hours every day. I mean, we're talking at a minimum, I would have studied 4 hours a day, I would say, every day. I did 4 hours, at least. And that's just, you know, learning words, practicing grammar, learning kanji, okay? Then of course, I'm talking to Japanese people, I'm in school, so I was listening to natives, so, you know, that all helped, but, you know, you needed to have that foundation of, of, um, of study. But it doesn't have to be from a textbook, okay? So, you can read books, okay? So children's books are a great place to start. You know, because children's books, they have a lot of vocabulary to talk about all these different animals. Like, do you know how to say rhinoceros? Do you know how to say hippopotamus? Do you know how to say all these kind of non-standard animals? And do you know how to count them? Which is something I'll be talking about a bit later. You know, people say, "Oh, can I?" You know, I have people ask me, "Oh, can I watch anime? Is that good study?" I'm like, "Yeah, if it's in Japanese." And it's, you know, it's from Japan, it'll be correct Japanese, so just listen to it. I always say just turn the subtitles off, and then if you want to watch the episode and understand it a bit better, rewatch it again, then with the subtitles on. But yeah, listen. I mean, some of my students love music, love Japanese music. And I said, yeah, great. Listen to the music, look up the lyrics, and sing the lyrics, and try and work out what the lyrics mean. So I mean, YouTube. There's channels just like mine. There's channels way better than mine that just have so much Japanese content, and it's just about exposing yourself to it as much as possible all the time. I know, especially in year 12, you don't have a whole bunch of time to be doing these type of things, but it's, if you want to get better, it's what's required. It's what's required. Okay, kanji. Alright, a lot of people really hate kanji, and I think that's a shame. I think kanji is probably the best part about Japanese. Maybe I'm a bit biased though, but it's just such a great part of Japanese. Um, so how do you get better at kanji? Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that kanji, if we're going to talk about self-teaching, kanji is so much self-teaching. I mean, I do go to a bit of kanji in my lessons, but I honestly think it's a bit of a waste of class time, because it's really there are lots of things you have to know about kanji, but most of the effort is going to be rote learning. Okay, you're just going to have to write those kanji out over and over again, and look up the readings, and, you know, test yourself by looking at two kanji together and how do you read them. Okay, but I think there's pretty much no better way to get better at kanji than flashcard apps. Okay, look, if you've got a phone, I'm sure everyone does now. Google Play Store, App Store, you know, whatever device you have, there are going to be free apps that will run you through um, kanji. Okay, there'll be so many. You don't have to pay for them. You don't have to have ones with really annoying ads. Just keep downloading and trying apps until you find one that's free, has no ads every word you click on, and you'll be fine. I can't really give you any recommendations. I mean, I have an Android, so I use one called Takoboto. Let me just write this one down. Now, Takoboto is actually a dictionary. That's why I have it originally. But then I found it has all these word lists saved in it and kanji lists with flashcards. So that's invaluable. Now I've had quite a few flashcard apps over the years, I mean they're all very similar. So it's really just the process of downloading them, try it out. If you like it, great, stick with it. If not, delete it, find another one. Now I used to, particularly when I was taking JLPT, I really depended on flashcard apps to get my kanji up. And I was on the bus for about 45 minutes to an hour one way to uni, and then again the same time back. So that's 2 hours a day I basically had where I was sitting on a bus and couldn't do much. So flashcard apps. I would just do it until I just didn't want to do it anymore, and then I'd take a 5-minute break, look out the window for a bit, and then go back and do it. Okay, so it's just about, you know, if you ever complain about I don't have enough time, it's like, well, you're probably not using your time. You're probably not using your time properly. I mean, are you watching TV? Are you spending a lot of time on the internet? Are you spending a lot of time on social media? I mean, social media is fine if your social media feed is full of Japanese and you're practicing reading Japanese, which is what mine seems to be these days. But if you want to get better at something, you have to dedicate a lot of time to it. Nothing worth having comes easy at all. So you just got to have to do some sacrifice and spend a few hours doing something that maybe you feel you'd rather be doing something else. But I mean, for example, year 12, you only really get the one shot at that exam. And when you're sitting in the exam and you can't remember that really easy kanji, or you can't remember that word, you're probably going to wish you'd spent a few more hours during the year doing that extra study. It'll pay off for sure. And it's just like everything, you know, that the more you do it, the better you get. And then you can study more and get better. And it's a real achievement, I think, if you can speak a second language. Alright, textbooks. Again, I don't particularly have any textbooks for kanji. I got one which was just called Basic Kanji. It's still in production. It's still in print, I guess. But really, none of these books are particularly better than the other one. I'm using one right now which I really like it's just a JLPT prep book. So it's just a matter of looking at that. But really, these textbooks are actually super cheap. Like these JLPT prep books I got, I'm pretty sure I got both of them delivered to my house from Japan, and I believe they were $20 or $25 in total, like including shipping. So the books cost almost nothing. But yeah, the specialty JLPT books are quite good. Now, which one should you get if you're trying to prepare for year 12? I would say you probably don't want to get the N5 books. They're probably a little bit too easy for N5. I mean, if you have them, it's not too bad. But I would say you probably want to be looking at N4. Okay, so I would say if you once you finish year 12, I mean, I always recommend all my students to take JLPT if they can. But if I've got a student who's in year 12 and they're a good student, so you know they're getting 70, 75, 80%, something like that, I would say that they really should be passing N4. Maybe you have to do a little bit of additional study, particularly with the kanji and the grammar, but that's where you should be aiming for. So I would really recommend. And then the way in Australia it works quite well is because your year 12 exams are like November, and then JLPT is generally first week or so of December, so you can kind of do both. Now I have a link here to my Dropbox where I've got some kanji cards for these are actually for Japanese kids for years 1, 2 and 3 in primary school. Now you might think, why do I care about this? Well, because the year 12 Japanese level is about year 2 in primary school. Don't feel bad about that. It might seem a bit strange. But yeah, so if you can learn all the year 1 and year 2 kanji, you'll be definitely at the level for year 12. So I would use those. And I've got a whole presentation on kanji and how to learn it. So I would just look through my playlist if you want to have a look at that one. But it's mainly about just practice, okay? I mean, I don't know if this is going to show up so well, but this is just kind of what you have to do. You just have a piece of paper and you write out kanji over and over and over again. Yeah. Don't think it's really going to... It's pencil on white paper, so But that's what it kind of takes. You just gotta practice a lot. Okay, another section which is definitely something that people could work a lot more on is counting. Okay, counting and numbers. So again, I've got a whole presentation on this. You can go watch it. But you really want to get good at counting. Alright. So for example, if someone says 料金は大人3000円、子供2500円. Okay, you should really be able to get that first go. Because in listening, sure, you will get it 2 times, but in real life you won't. Alright, you're not going to get these numbers again. So you want to be practicing a lot of counting and a lot of numbers. Now, when I say counting, I'm talking about money. Alright, this is going to be the big one because I can almost guarantee you that on your exam, you're going to get something that involves money. Alright, it's going to be, it might even just be a one-off reference like I did, like an entrance fee to a entrance fee to some place, you know. But it could be, you know, paying for something like food or whatever and getting change. And then a really common one is that they'll want to buy something, and they'll be like, say, well, it's this much money, and they'll say, oh, but I want to add that as well, and then they'll be like, okay, well then that's plus this much money. So then you have to be able to, you know, they don't actually give you the answer of how much it costs, but you've got to add them up kind of in your head. So you've got to be kind of quick. People, here I'm talking about just counters in general. So you know, we say hitori, futari, sannin, yonnin, okay? And then we, again, I've done a whole presentation on this counters thing, so I've got a table there of what the most common counters are. So if you learn those, you'll be fine. But it's mainly counting animals, counting flat objects, so ichimai, nimai, ippiki, nihiki, counting minutes, of course, ippun, nifun. Alright, dates. Now this, I gotta say, is probably the worst area that people perform in. You have to know it, okay? I know it's painful and I know it's annoying, but you just have to know how to say the date, alright? So first of all, where should you start? Learn how to say your own birthday. Alright, very important. You should be able to say a birthday like that, without even thinking about it. Why should you start there? Well, first of all, your birthday doesn't change. So once you memorize it, that's it. It's not going to change, so you can kind of rely on it. But then it helps you go, well, how do I say years? That's right, I say the years in thousands and add nen. How do I say the month? Well, I get the number and add gatsu, and then whatever, the day. You just have the day that you were born on. Okay, hopefully that day is between 1 and 10, 14, 24, or 20, because those are the kind of trickier days to remember. But if not, you know, no big deal. And then you just want to practice, how can I say the date? Okay, so what have we got today? It is the 7th of May. Okay, so 2018年5月7日. Alright, you should just be able to come out with it that quickly, okay? Because that's going to pop up. So travel, okay? Travel is a massive section in Japanese Year 12, alright? You either will spend first semester or second semester talking about travel. I mean, I know that people still are, and I had to when I was back in high school in the early 2000s. So these topics don't change much, let's just put it that way. But you know, say I'm going from this date to this date, okay? So you want to work that out. Now the other kind of subsection within dates you really want to focus on is spans of time, okay? So we're saying 2年間, 2ヶ月間, 1週間. Alright, you want to be able to know all these, again, just instantaneously, without having to think about them. And my counting and numbers presentation talk about spans of time as well. The other thing is you want to know your days of the week, alright? Getsu, Kasui, Mokkin, Do, Nichi. Alright, just want to come out with those really quick. Time, most people are okay with time. So you just want to practice your minutes, seconds, remember your AM, PM, all that kind of stuff. But you want to get good at it. Okay, another big section that's going to come up is directions. Okay, so this is very common in listening. People are going to be going somewhere, and you have to say where they go or what they walk past. You might get more of a one that's in the reading section where you get given a map and you have to say how to get from place to be. But yeah, this is the thing about directions is it's one of those things that I used to avoid pretty heavily, but but it's kind of very standard. It's very standard how you give directions in Japanese. So as long as you've got your te form down, you know how you say hidari, migi, matsugu, you know, toru, hashi, wataru, all these kind of words that come up all the time. Shingo, kosaten. Alright, if we can get all these words, you can pretty much do directions easily. Then of course you have to remember all your shops, okay, all your different shops and all your different types of buildings. You know, yubin-kyoku, ginko, pan-ya, kutsu-ya, concert hall, chūshajō, that's a very common one, so parking lot. Okay, you want to practice all these words so that you can just kind of get to them really quickly. Alright, Japanese conversation classes. Now, this is a little bit hard to talk about so universally, but I'll just point out that, I mean, there are Japanese conversation classes around you. So, go to Facebook, alright, see if you can search local groups. You should be able to find some Japanese culture club or something. Universities, especially if they're running Japanese programs, they're going to have Japanese conversation classes, and generally they're free. Okay, they're just very casual. You just find out what time they're on and when they're happening, and you just rock up. Okay, generally I just say if you know where it is, like if it's in a cafe or something, just find the group of Asian people. That's probably going to be the Japanese class, right? Because I mean, at least in Australia, we've got quite a lot of Japanese people here on working holiday, and they tend to come to these classes, right? Because they're trying to practice their English. So if they can find people who can speak Japanese, who are also English speakers, you can do a bit of a language exchange, okay? So you're going to find a lot of Japanese people there. And when I was doing my JLPT and I was really getting into it, I made it like a promise to myself that I would go to at least one of these every week, and I tried to go to 2, and if I could do it, I would try and go to 3. Because if you can think like 3 hours a week where you basically get to speak Japanese with a native speaker and go back and forth on a variety of topics, it's really handy. Okay, that's also a good way to find out what's kind of happening in Japan. You know, what are the big musical things, what's the big scandals and all that. So yeah, find those classes. There really should be free ones around you. If not, if you know about some Japanese BBS, so the one here is called Pass Tsushin, but just local boards that are kind of geographically locked kind of thing, and you can post ads. You can post ads for Japanese conversation class partner. So yeah, don't ever feel shy about going to these. They're very casual and they're good fun. You know, you can meet some really interesting people there. Okay, the last point that I want to bring up is vocabulary. Okay, this is really going to make or break, I believe, year 12. Okay, because you'll see that a lot of the grammar that you do in year 12, it's not really that different from year 11. You go into a little bit more detail. It's all about like little things, just saying little phrases, set phrases. You know, and it's just combining lots of different grammar, but there's not all this new, really like a whole bunch of new grammar that you really look at. It's more just testing you a lot more in depth than year 11 did. So the big differentiator is kanji and vocabulary. Okay, so you have to find out what works for you. All right. What I used to do, and I did this especially in uni, is I just had a word list, and I've got that now, but it's not a physical one. It's on my tablet that I flick through. I try and do it every night. Just read down the list of words I don't know, and then cover up one side and just try and read the Japanese and guess the English word. Do the other one, cover up the English word, try and guess the Japanese word. Do that. But it doesn't have to be something like that. It can be songs. Okay, so I mentioned this before. So if you like listening to Japanese music, try and look up the lyrics and work out what they're actually saying, and just try and remember these words. The amount of times that I've been in an exam and then I couldn't remember a word, I just like sang a little song to myself that I knew that word was in, and I got the word. It's happened quite a few times, so it can be very useful. Kanji study. I've already talked about this, but I mean, that's what I love about kanji. When you start learning how two kanji go together, and you can make, you can come across a word that you actually have never seen before, but you can read the kanji individually, and then you can look it up in a dictionary. I mean, to me, that's a bit of an amazing feature of Japanese. I know there's a lot of work to get to that point, but to me that's quite amazing that there's a word that you don't know what it is, but you can still read it and then you can look it up if you need to. But if you've got a good idea of what the kanji means, you can even guess at what the meaning is a lot of the time. Read books, okay, so you want to get books which are aimed at young adults or junior high schoolers or something like that, and preferably you want to try and get ones with furigana so that the kanji isn't that much of a big deal. But if you want to really practice your kanji, that's one thing you can do. Alright, well that's a very quick run through of like some of the major things. I think if you touch on all these points, as long as you're still studying of course, but if you touch on all these points you should get quite a lot better at Japanese. But yeah, if people have any suggestions about what helped them during exams, I'd be happy to hear. You can just leave it in the comments below. Otherwise, just hit the subscribe button. When I go live, you'll get notifications. And I'm hoping to do more content like this. Actually, I actually find this part of Japanese one of the most interesting things when you look at how to get better at exams. But it's also something that I feel like I'm very experienced with, and particularly with my Year 12 students, these are the kind of things I normally spend a lot of time talking about, like not falling into these traps, or recognizing when that you're being set up for a trap, for example, and what kind of grammar you should really know back to front so that you don't fall into these traps. Okay, well thank you so much for watching everyone. Please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions or inquiries, please send me an email, or you can just leave a comment and I'll get back to you. But that's it. So sayonara from me, and please share the video to all your friends who you know are doing Japanese and could use some help. Thanks so much.